On this edition of Confessions of a Marketer, we're talking about the next generation of marketers, and we have hope for the future. I'm Mark Reed Edwards. Welcome to episode 26 of Confessions of a Marketer. I'll get to my chat with Bob McCullough in a moment. Last time we talked GDPR with CEO of Wonderman Data, Jacques von Niekerk. It was a great discussion. We hope to have Jacques back in a few months to talk about the effects he sees on GDPR. A few of you have reached out to me and asked whether we will have him back, and indeed, we're planning on maybe late summer or early fall. Next week, we have Josh Hainum on to discuss questions and the role they can play in marketing more effectively. Okay, on to Bob McCullough. I've known Bob for years. He worked in marketing and as an analyst before striking out into academia as an adjunct professor for a number of Boston area universities. One thing that always struck me was how glowingly he talked about his students, how bright they were, and how brimming with ideas they were. So, interested in talking about the next generation of marketers, I turned to Bob for guidance. Hope you enjoy the chat. Let's get to it. Bob McCullough, it's great to have you on Confessions of a Marketer. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
So as a professor, you're helping mold the next generation of business people, and many of them might end up being marketers. What do you think about that generation?
Well, I'm really bullish on the next generation. I think they're going to be great marketers. I think one of the things that, us as of the previous generation have to keep in mind of the differences in this generation in order to give us kind of the perspective to appreciate what they bring to the table. One of the most important things is probably you and I, during the different parts of our career, have had technology introduced to us. We have to remember this generation grew up with technology.
Right.
The expectation is there that the technology is going to be there from the get-go. So, I think this is one of the hallmarks of the generation. I think it's going to reflect in the way they approach business, the way they approach marketing. So I think that's probably one of the big things to keep in mind. What that does is it makes it hard to come up with like a wow factor from a technology standpoint.
Right.
Again, maybe our other generations, we say, oh, that's amazing. You mean that I can post this document and everybody can edit it, right? It's that wow factor is just not going to be there with this generation. As I say, it's going to be kind of expected, which is great, right? I mean, it's great because it makes things easier to accomplish, and on the other hand, it makes it challenging because it's going to make hard to come up with those kinds of products, right? Now, and the other thing I'll say about the generation is that by definition, despite what some of the global leaders around the world might think now, by definition, the viewpoint is that the world is global.
Right.
There's not even a second thought of that, right? There's no sense of, should a business expand to another geography? It's just there. It's there from the outset.
Right.
So those are some of the big things that jump out at me about the generation and maybe how they're going to approach marketing.
Yeah, and I think the millennial generation kind of gets unfairly labeled as lazy and demanding. And, I think that may arise from the fact that they're looking for meaning in their lives and in their professional lives specifically. Maybe something that our generation, you and I, came to late in our careers. It was something we just went to work and kind of didn't question it. How do you think that kind of point of view that millennials and the younger generation have will affect business in the next 10 to 20 years? Well,
first of all, I totally agree with you, Mark, that the generation is unfairly maligned. It's a little bit of the get off my lawn phenomenon, right?
Right.
When we think back to when we were young, I'm sure that the generation before us were saying things about us, right? They're so entitled. They expect us to do these things, et cetera, et cetera. I agree with you. This generation is unfairly maligned. And it's just kind of the course and nature that generations get unfairly maligned. That said, there are definitely some things that other things that ring true. It's the idea of finding meaning.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting one, right? Certainly we don't see I'm going to start off at the bottom rung and I'm going to climb the ladder. I'm thinking about the things that my head was filled with when I was getting out of grad school. I'm going to climb this corporate ladder. And I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And by the time I'm in my 50s, I'm going to be CEO, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, there's a lot better sense of balance.
Right.
And there's a lot better sense of is this the right life for me? And that's great, right? That's great. Hopefully hopefully this next generation is going to have a better sense. One of the things that does lead to is a little bit of a big hit mentality.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the next CEO. I want to be, the next Elon Musk.
Right.
I want to be, I want to have this huge impact. And I want to be, as I say, I want to be the next big leader who comes up with this brilliant idea. I want to be Jeff Bezos, things like that. And that's something that maybe our generation can bring to the table, is a little bit of a sense of perspective on getting there and being more realistic about it and things like that. The other side that kind of goes along with that is that the millennial generation has a much greater sense of the common good.
Yeah.
Right? Companies don't always keep in mind the common good and what's good for society. I think that this next generation of business leaders is going to kind of walk in the door with a much better perspective on that.
Yeah. And, when we're sitting over a drink or two, sometimes you will marvel at the achievements of your students and how bright they are. So I think you've answered this, but let me ask it again. You think we're in pretty good hands?
I do. I definitely think we're in good hands. I think that, that innovation is going to continue. I think that, there are probably some things that are going to fall by the wayside, right? I don't think that I think the innovation will be more focused on a larger audience and a more visible audience. So I, for instance, don't see students getting that excited about careers that are B2B careers.
Yeah.
You and I worked in the software world, and a lot of the software that I worked on and a lot of the industry analysis I did was in the B2B world. And how can we make a big impact on supply chains? That kind of gets an eye roll from this generation. But that's okay. I mean, that's certainly okay, because what that will do is that will bring new things to consumer-facing businesses, right? That will bring new things to the concept of the mass market model. One of the things that I get excited about is what I call, and this is not what is written about it, but what I call kind of an information barter.
Uh-huh.
This generation of marketers understand that in order to get customers, in order to get people loyal to your company, a lot of the times you have to give them something of value. In order to monetize the relationship, you have to start the relationship by giving them something of value. I think of, best example I can think of is a freemium app, right? There are so many apps out there that, you can do lots and lots of stuff for free, but then you say, oh, wait, I don't want to hear this ad in Spotify, so I'm going to pay $9.99 a month, and I can monetize my relationship that way. That's part of what I see continuing and more of a shift to. So, yeah. To get back to your question, I absolutely think that there's a lot of bright, motivated students. They are not, as we like to say, they are not purely entitled. They are not looking for an easy way out. They're just looking for a different path, and we got to really embrace that.
Right. A different path doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It's just different than maybe the path that we
absolutely
took to the great success that we now enjoy.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so you worked in marketing, you worked in the analyst world and other parts of business before you joined academia. So you've seen marketers in previous generations at the companies you've worked at. How do you think this up-and-coming generation compares to those generations?
Well, a lot of it is the stuff that I said earlier, right, is that, Donald Trump, Theresa May, all of them aside, it's a global viewpoint, and globalization is there. And there's no getting around it, right? The other thing, as I said, is they're much more aware of societal discrepancies and the part that businesses play in it. One of my most inspiring lectures or conversations that I have in the classroom is when I start talking about kind of the moral viewpoint of marketing and how over time the example that I use, and if any of your listeners are in this industry, please don't take it personally, but I use the fashion industry as an example, right? There is a certain level of recognizable, this is an extreme word, but a certain level of recognizable insidiousness to their approach, to the fashion industry's approach, when you think about things like body image and things like that. I think that this next generation gets that, and they understand that it's part of their responsibility to steer away from that. It's part of their responsibility to give a good message, give a clear, good message, be competitive, but at the same time, be more moral. Right? It's not about marketing today. Teaching marketing today is not about how do you get that? How do you get your elbows up on your competition? How do you beat them? How do you drive them out? The teaching marketing today is about understanding what value you can provide to your customers and figuring out how you're going to do it. So that's a lot about what's happening, and that's a lot about what I feel that this generation of marketers is embracing.
That's wonderful, Bob. Thanks for being with me here on Confessions of a Marketer. It was a great discussion, and now I have hope for the future.
I'm glad to play that role in your life, Mark.
Really want to thank Bob for being my guest. With hope for the future, I can move on to the next episode of Confessions of a Marketer and our chat next time with Josh Hainham on questions. Should be a fun discussion, so stay tuned. This episode of Confessions of a Marketer was written, produced, and edited by yours truly. T. Jordan of A-Class Productions wrote the theme music. Confessions of a Marketer is a trademark of Reed Edwards Global Inc., and this episode is copyright 2018. I'm Mark Reed Edwards. See you next time.